Tech Sounds presents EduTrends.
Welcome to EduTrends presented by the Institute for the Future of Education. This is a Tech Sounds podcast, the official podcast of Tecnológico de Monterrey. I am Jose Pepe Escamilla, Associate Director of the Institute for the Future of Education. Today's guest is Stephen Downs, philosopher and also new media technology and online learning researcher. Stephen, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. I would like to start with a sort of personal questions. You've devoted much of your career to the philosophy of mind and science, as well as the intersection between technology and education. How do you ended working in this area? What drew you to this path?
By accident? That's a good question because I started out, I wanted to study physics. That was my interest. I was always interested in science. And then in university, the English courses were all full. It was a required humanities option. So I took a course in philosophy, and it turned out I was very good in philosophy. Meanwhile, to support myself, I worked at a computer company. And so I learned a fair bit about computing. And then I was interested in that too. And then to support myself later, I was working at Athabasca University, and that's what brought me into education.
Interesting. And why did you keep in education?
Paid the bills. There was at a certain point in my life, I had a choice, I think, and that was to either pursue a career as an academic philosopher, and that would have required a number of sacrifices, both intellectually and perhaps financially, or to pursue what was also an interest in education and computing and the whole developing internet, which was really interesting to me. And that also involved sacrifices, but they were different, and I was able to make them all work together.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. I think you took the right decision, by the way. So,
It kind of worked out. Yeah.
yes. So before we started recording, we recollected some events, and we met in the past in person. And as part of the things that you have done in the past is developing the theory of connectivism and what MOOCs used to be, maybe not what they are right now.
Yeah.
And I would like to ask you, how do you see these ideas evolving, and what are the lessons from those early experiments that we could apply right now? Maybe not what the MOOCs are right now, but what those experiments were.
Sure. Well, connectivism, which I co-developed with George Siemens, and he, of course, is the one who came up with the name for it, is based around a network theory of learning. It's based around an approach to learning that is based on connections and forming communities and networks. And that's what we built our original MOOCs based upon. And in order to make that work, there are certain conditions that need to be in place. And one of them was openness. And so it was important to us at the very beginning that our online course in connectivism, which we offered in 2008, be open. And by open, we didn't just mean you don't have to be formally admitted to the course. And it didn't just mean you don't have to pay to access the course, but open in the sense that we wanted people to follow their own interests, to use their own equipment, to meet and have conversations in their own spaces. In other words, to create a network out of a course. And that's what became the MOOC for us. Now that, of course, as you suggest, changed quite a bit when the commercial MOOCs came onto the scene, which were much more centralized, and eventually you had to pay for them. But the idea of open online learning never went away. And to this day, I mean, if you don't think about things like Coursera, or edX or Open Learn, which came to characterize what the wider community thought MOOCs were, if you don't consider those, the idea of open online learning has prevailed. There's a significant amount of open online learning today. And that really is the message to carry forward, that we can informally and even to a large degree independently form networks and communities around a topic of interest and learn together.
Mhm. Very interesting how things sometimes evolve in different ways, no, that we can sometimes don't foresee. And I believe that's also what we are discussing right now with AI, in particular generative AI, no? Um, Different ways in which the approach for access to knowledge and open learning or open education are going to transform the way AI is going to transform, no? So, and also what are the things that could become there that are good or benefits, and what are the things that are risks or things in these technologies. So I would like you to elaborate a little bit what was your thinking on this uh, development of AI in open education and knowledge development.
Well, I mean, the first thing is that AI, as it has developed, and in particular things like large language models and neural network based models in general, is that it is a vindication to a certain degree of the idea that we've had for a long time, that networks are things that can learn. Um, that learning itself and knowledge itself can and maybe does consist of the way an interactive network is organized. And I think that tells us something about how people learn, um, because people are in many important ways composed of networks, neural networks, and other kinds of networks in the human body. And we learned in the history of artificial intelligence that you can't just give a computer a set of rules or principles to follow and get intelligence that way. That you have to expose the computer to large amounts of data, or in the case of humans, experience, and that they learn from that they develop their own understanding, their own ways of categorizing, their own ways of perceiving regularities or patterns in that data. And that's what constitutes learning. And so when we're thinking about teaching humans, we understand, I think, today better than we did 20, 30 years ago, that in order to develop a deep knowledge in a subject, we have to expose them much more to practical experience and practical knowledge, or practical practice in the domain, rather than just lectures and textbooks. Um, but I think there's also a secondary thing that is a harder lesson, and that we're still working on, and that's how societies learn. A society, like a human brain and like a neural network, is composed of interconnected individual entities. Societies do have social knowledge, they have languages, they have cultures, they respond to things. And the way a society learns is, again, very similar, which tells us that, if we want social change, we have to focus on the whole society. We can't just tell a society to change. It has to experience and grow into that change.
Yes, so it's very interesting also how these models of networks that are part of large language models uh, are inspired by the the by humans or by the body, by the brain, and how, according to your comment, it's at the same time validating, no, how the body works or how societies work. Uh, I I would like to switch to the risks of this. So I would like to ask you what are the risks that you see on relying too much on these technologies, on using them for different purpose, particularly in a university or in a learning environment?
Yeah, I mean there are risks in relying too much on any technology. You develop a monoculture, and so if the technology fails, so does the culture. Um, in particular, when we're looking at artificial intelligence systems, um, we need to get used to the idea that these systems can be wrong, that they're not uh, factually based the way just looking up in a database or even looking up in a book were, but that they're producing anew each time a response to a query, and that response might be factually incorrect or even factually not useful or even factually harmful. And so the danger is that we're not sufficiently cautious and critical working with a computer. This is the old story, right? People following GPS in their car and they drive into a river because that's where the GPS took them. The same sort of danger exists um, in a wider sense, following large language models and artificial intelligence generally. I don't think there's a danger that the computers will become super intelligent and take us all over because, uh, I mean, humans have tried that from time to time over the years, and it takes more than super intelligence to take everything over. Um, but I think that, and I'm not really sure how I want to phrase this. I think that there's a danger of misunderstanding what the computer's capabilities are, and even of overgeneralizing what these computer capabilities are. We talk about artificial intelligence and large language models as though it's one single thing, when it's not one single thing. It's actually hundreds of different things, and each of them have different capabilities, and each of them have different risks. And if we're not sensitive to that, like any tool, we might use the wrong tool for the wrong job. Um, People have expressed concerns as well about bias and prejudice in neural network systems. And it's important for us to be clear that what comes out of an artificial intelligence is to a large degree based on the data that goes into it. And if the data is bad, so is what comes out of it. And so, but what goes into it is all of us, right? It learns from all the things that we've written and published over the years, the images that we create, the videos that we create is very much a reflection of us. And so, uh, a lot of the time, the flaws that we attribute to artificial intelligence are often the flaws that already exist in our society. And it's tempting, but I think incorrect, to blame AI on a problem in society that we have already created. Uh, these days, a lot of people, for example, are talking about the concentration of power and ownership of AI in a few small companies and how that's probably bad for the world. Um, but that's something that's happening throughout society and not just in artificial intelligence. And so if that's considered to be a problem, and I agree that it is, then that's something that should be looked at in its own right and not simply as a property of AI.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, I agree with you that with that point of view, it depends on the data, not what you feed into the system. But maybe one of the problems is that it can amplify, that because of the somehow the feedback loop that AI has, that what you produce has this bias and it creates even more bias. And that is tempting also to shortcut the system and do something different. I also believe there's another risk. I talk a lot with professors and directors. I work, which is students doing cognitive offloading of their of what they should be learning. No, so they rely too much on AI. They don't do this hard work practice that you were talking about in our previous question,
Mhm.
so that they develop these skills, either more fundamental skills, soft skills that I like to call them power skills because they are so important, like critical thinking. You can only develop that by really enduring and struggling and trying, and practicing that skills in a subject that you have to go not on the surface, but a little bit more in depth, so that you really have the opportunity uh, uh, to struggle, to explain or to comprehend. And that's what develop this skill, in my opinion. And what if students rely on AI to do some of these tasks, and then basically when they graduate, they haven't developed those skills, no? So I also hear this concern in general.
Sure. Um, and that's always been the case. In order to develop the skill, um, we have to practice that skill. And there's a state, sometimes people call it the state of flow, right? Where we need to be posed a challenge, but it needs to be a solvable challenge so that it's not too easy and it's not too hard. It is difficult or difficult to a certain level. Um, and, that's true. We could draw the analogy with human exercise. You won't become physically fit if you use a car to drive everywhere. So you should probably practice physical fitness. It's, with things like, and I've seen this talked about in other contexts, mathematics. If you use a calculator for everything, you won't necessarily develop the skill in mathematics. The question here is, I think, though, uh, what skills are these that are foundational and what skills are these that are important? Um, as technology develops, um, the skill set that is foundational changes over time. A foundational skill used to be able to write in cursive because that was really the only way you could write using a fountain pen. But with ballpoint pens, the need to write in cursive goes away. Similarly, it used to be a foundational skill to be able to ride a horse and to take care of a horse and all of that. But that the need for that skill goes away. And even things like walking, we need to walk today, sure, but we don't need to walk 50 kilometers. It makes much more sense to use a car. So there are some skills we need to retain and some skills we don't. Well, how do we determine? Well, if we eliminate the use of AI as we're developing skills, then to my mind, it becomes more likely that we will be learning the wrong skills. Because in the world of the future, there will be AI. It's not going to go away, right? And so the skills that are foundational are those skills that people need in a world where they're working with AI. So simply saying something was foundational in 1990 doesn't mean it'll be foundational in 2030. In fact, it probably won't be. You point to critical thinking. I agree. I agree that critical thinking will be one of those skills. What counts as critical thinking we can talk about, and that's fine. I'll use different definitions of critical thinking, but we can roughly define it as having the capacity to tell truth from falsehood, or at least likely truth from likely falsehood. This rough and ready characterization. That's a skill we need when we're working with artificial intelligence, precisely because an AI system isn't an automatic truth machine. It's more like working with a person than working with a book, where the AI will get facts wrong, where the AI might mislead you because it's trying to please you, where an AI might be subject to the interests of a third party. So we need to be able to use an AI critically. But what's the best way to learn how to think critically when working with an AI is to practice thinking critically while working with an AI, and not thinking critically even though there's no AI. Right? There isn't some sort of magic set of skills that you develop independently of working with the AI. It's tempting to think that there are, but I think that being a critical thinker when reading a newspaper is going to be subtly different than being critical while interacting with an AI, just as it's subtly different, both of them, from being a critical thinker when having a conversation with a person, or learning in a classroom, or debating in a political arena. They're all subtly different. And what it is to be skilled in those is only learned in those arenas.
Mm-hmm. I want to dissect a little bit what you say, Stephen, because I think it's very interesting. So I heard that some people said if we want to test those basic skills like critical thinking, we may have to make sure that it's a student that is performing the task. So let's go back to proctor written exams face to face. Let's go back to oral presentations. Let's go back to something that we are sure that the student is not offloading some of the task in a program, or in one of these models like ChatGPT. So what you're saying is that that is not necessarily correct, because what the type of critical thinking that we need is one that is critical about the use of AI. So we need to develop some other kind of activities, task, or evaluation methods that rely on the use of AI, but at the same time rely on critical thinking.
Yep. I've talked, or I've used a phrase recently to describe this approach. The phrase I called, the phrase is AI agnostic. So the idea here is that students or individuals are set a task where it doesn't matter whether or not they use AI. If they use it, fine. If they don't use it, fine. And then we look at what they've done, and we can ask questions like, well, did they approach this task from a critical perspective? Did they approach this task um, in a way that assures that the things that they believe are true are actually true, for example? So, I mean, critical thinking is important, yes. But it's not a question of asking, is it on? I mean, I think it's the wrong question to ask. Like, did the student do this all by themselves? Right? Students don't do anything all by themselves ever. And I mean that in a strictly literal sense. A student writing an exam, for example, did not do it all by themselves. They were provided a book, they were provided a pen, they were given a place to write the exam. There's a clock on the wall that they consult. They were given instructions ahead of the exam. There's all kinds of things other people did. And they seem like meaningless physical parts of this, maybe. But they all play a role in setting the expectations and indeed the behavior of the student in that particular place at that particular time. It's, it's asking, did the student do this all by themselves is kind of like saying, did everything important happen inside the student's brain? But how much education is really like that? When we test a student using a lathe to spin, to create a table leg, right? We don't ask, did the student do it all by themselves? No, the piece of equipment did a big part of the work too. If we ask them to do a science lab, and use a microscope and observe a virus. I don't know if you can observe a virus through a microscope, right? The microscope did the work, the light did the work, the virus did the work, and the student did, it's a whole environment. And I think the same is true with artificial intelligence, right? You ask the student to perform a task, assess the quality of the water in the river to determine whether it's safe to drink. Now, that's a task that you can examine a student on. You can already know ahead of time what the right answer is. And you tell the student, do that. And the student may or may not use AI, may or may not use a microscope, may or may not use chemicals, whatever. But you don't care about that. You care about, did they follow a reasonable process to determine that the answer that they gave you was the right one? And that's critical thinking.
Exactly. Very, very interesting approach or way of thinking, Stephen. I would like to ask you if, besides critical thinking, there are other skills that you think are crucial on the future for a future world full of AI?
Oh, probably. I once wrote a paper called Things You Really Need to Know a long time ago. And it contained things like being able to predict consequences of your actions, uh, which will always be a pretty important skill. Um, uh, Being able to have conversations with other people peacefully. So negotiation and mediation skills. These are important because conflicts will still happen and probably won't be 100% adjudicated by AI. I included things like knowing how to value yourself, which we often don't think of as a foundational skill, but actually is a foundational skill. A person who sees no value in themselves really can't experience the most out of life. The ability to find a purpose or a meaning in life. Again, pretty important foundational skill. These latter two we don't actually teach in school, which is at least not explicitly, but I think we probably do that implicitly. Um, you know, so yeah, I think there are other foundational skills, but they're not going to be knowing a lot of science or being able to describe a history of the Roman Empire, the way it used to be. Uh, there'll be what people have called soft skills, or I forget the term that you used, but I thought it was power skills. Yeah, I mean, there are going to be these skills, but they're hard to define now, because, in a contemporary society where knowledge work still really does matter, the non-knowledge skills haven't risen to the status of foundational, but they will.
Yes. I I say this example that I think you may not be in agreement. So I will say it to see what's your reaction. No, I say that these power skills are durable over time, and disciplinary skills generally have a expiration date. No, so if we take a doctor from the beginning of the 20th century that was able to critical think, no, to have this skill of critical thinking, and we bring it to today, in terms of knowledge, he will be like a sorcerer, a shaman, or something like that, because medicine has advanced so much and has changed that there will be maybe things that are completely opposite to what you should be doing to save a life or whatever. But in terms of critical thinking, if that person was able to apply critical thinking, he or she will still be able to apply critical thinking in 2025. Do you think it still holds, or do you believe it's different?
I think we're actually better critical thinkers today than we were a century ago or 2 centuries ago. I think as a population, we have a better understanding of how how to arrive at true conclusions, which is why medicine today is so much better than it was back then.
Exactly.
But I don't disagree with your core premise. Um, if I mean, when you talked about the doctor, the first thing that my mind went to is the skill of care. And care is an attribute, and care is a practice or a way of relating to people that was valuable for doctors then as well as now, and indeed probably constituted the main value of doctors back then because their medical skills were awful. So and that's a skill that will probably survive artificial intelligence. It will still be important in 2050 to care. And there may be entire disciplines that we can't imagine now based on the capacity to care. You look at the typical caring professions like teaching or nursing, um, and many of the actual things that are done by teachers and nurses could probably be done by a robot. But in terms of care, the fact that it's a person that's caring and not a machine actually matters. And it matters because care is based on a relation between two persons, where each is able to convey the importance of something to the other. It's based on care philosophy, right? So that'll probably survive. But we might not call it that. We might not trace the lineage of whatever that discipline is to care. Um, the way a physician in the 1800s might have done it, or we might. I don't think anybody was talking about critical thinking in the 1800s. In fact, I'm pretty sure they weren't. But as a discipline that only emerges in the mid 20th century. I mean, in the 1800s, we would talk about logic and reason, but rhetoric and other kind of intellectual disciplines were how we characterized it. You know, and many of the aspects of critical thinking that we have today, especially statistical thinking, didn't exist. But there's a thread that runs through there. Just having the attitude of mind that following a process leads you to better conclusions. That's there. I think the real question is, does it matter if we isolate that and say that's the thing that's important? Are we even in the best position to be able to do that? I'm not sure.
Yes,
It's an interesting thought, though.
it's something that is very important. It's also true that if you ask any university if their students develop critical thinking through their passage of the university, all of them will say yes. And when you say, show me the money, They
Yeah.
will say, no, well, let's develop, magically because. So I think that we should be more intentional in general, in my opinion. No, so if these skills here are so relevant and become even more relevant in the future, we have to be more intentional. We measure that. We try to be more precise, no, on that part.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. I mean, I don't want to say something trite like you can only manage what you can measure. But at the same time, if we say that we're teaching critical thinking, we need to have some way of knowing, just like a good scientist, whether that practice has been successful or not.
Exact, exact. So we're come to the end of our talk today. I would like to ask you a last question, Stephen. Uh, can you share with us some thoughts about the future of education in the coming years? You could choose 5 years, 10 years, whatever window of time that you want, and give us some thoughts about what do you think the future of education will be. It's a challenging question. Huh?
It is a challenging question, and it's challenging for a variety of reasons. Um, we are so inclined to believe that the system of education that we have will continue, and there's good reasons for that. I mean, it has existed for hundreds of years. We've invested billions of dollars into it. We have large institutions, a lot of physical infrastructure, and none of that is going to go away. And humans, if nothing else, follow the fallacy of sunk cost, right? We've put so much into the system, we're not just going to abandon it. And I think for good reason, right? We do need to be cautious about changing the educational system. But I think the way we look at it might change. Even allowing that all these institutions continue. Um, I've long said that the educational system will not change from within itself. It will change from outside. And I think that with the arrival of the internet and now with the arrival of artificial intelligence, we are seeing a gradual increase in the capacity of people to learn and to learn more and more complex things on their own. And by on their own, I don't mean by themselves, but I mean outside the formal institutional structure of an educational system. I've learned how to repair and maintain a bicycle simply through watching YouTube videos and repairing and maintaining a bicycle, for example. And many people have learned professions in that way. Um, you know, programming, computer programming is something that many people have learned on their own, following examples and and developing the skills on their own computer at home or with their friends or with a group of people online. This is gradually increasing in importance. It's not overnight. It's not replacing educational systems, but it's putting pressure on them. And I think that over time, the educational system will react to that. And it will react to that not by disappearing, because that would be stupid. Why would you do that? Right? You've got all this infrastructure, all this expertise. Um, it will react to that by helping foster and build this environment where people can learn for themselves. So instead of students coming to the college, coming to the university, and staying there for 4 years, um, the university will stress a more community based kind of learning where it provides resources and support, equipment in some cases, facilities in some cases, which help entire communities learn, as opposed to helping, only those who qualify for admission learn. It's still going to be a gradual thing, right? It's the sort of thing we saw in the beginning with things like the Open University, and indeed even Athabasca University and distance education in general. but more and more, especially as universities face increasing financial pressure, more and more we see that they feel a need to reach more and more people in society. That's the only way to maintain their social relevance and their economic standing. Uh, I know there's an argument that they should do less and less and less and focus on smaller and smaller groups of people. Um, I think from the perspective of survival, that would be a mistake. I mean, no sector, no institution has ever survived by shrinking. Um, so the response by many, by those that are successful, will be to expand and do less and help people become more capable of doing more for themselves. So that's how I would describe at least a future of education, one I expect to happen, but it's not guaranteed.
Not guaranteed. I can agree with you, and you say it beautifully. But I say that universities have to transition into lifelong learnees, where they become the learning partner of their extended community, not only alumni of the degree, so that we think on different ways of learning. So with this, we can end our chat for today, and has been a pleasure, Stephen, talking to you. I want to thank you for your time and your insights on the future of education. I enjoyed this talk, and I'm sure our audience will enjoy it too.
Thanks, been my pleasure.